All kinds of big news tonight. We've got Josh Allen on the Madden 24 cover. We've got Ed Oliver extension. We've got the Buffalo Bills signing Leonard Floyd. But first, our guys with Handsome Jack.
Broadcasting live to Bills Mafia worldwide with Greg Tompsett and Aaron Quinn.
Welcome to the NFL. Doesn't matter what's happened before today. Today's a brand new day. It's a brand new season.
Your number one podcast for objective Buffalo Bills coverage. No matter where you are, we got you covered.
Good evening and welcome to the Cover One Buffalo podcast. You are joining your host, Greg Tompsett, along with my partner in crime, Aaron Quinn. Aaron, for the first week of June, there's a weird amount of news.
There's always something going on in the NFL, right? Like we talk about it all the time. There's no off season. There's no rest.
Slow time.
It just keeps on going, especially when your GM's Brandon Beane. Right. Just a busy guy. You had tweeted something like we have Bean after dark and you were looking for breakfast bean. Like
I'm not used to news breaking at 7:45 a.m. I was in the shower.
He's just, he is putting in the work and putting together a really fun roster. We were just talking about it offline. Couple past weeks, like this is the time of year where these shows get a little bit harder to do, and we're like kind of all right, well, let's look through the positional previews. But we bumped this defensive line group up here because of all the big news here this week, and I got really excited to do this show with you. Where the past couple of weeks, it's like, hey, how are we going to be able to fill the hour talking about some of these positions? This one, dude, man, brace yourselves, people watching live. It could go over. I don't know. We'll see.
So obviously, our normal flow, we would have been going from last week. We talked running backs, went through all the statistical breakdowns. I had a chance Friday night to have Chris Chouse on for the fantasy show, talk through all the different ways that can work. And I thought it was going to flow right into doing wide receivers this week. And then all this news breaks and we decided, hey, let's shift it around. And then with that already planned with our change today, we got additional news. I don't know, everybody listening to the show, we always kind of look at some of the demographic changes and age groups and different people. I loved playing Madden. I was a big Madden player. I actually started my first real love of video games was Tecmo Super Bowl. So I'm you guys know I'm nerdy with numbers. I like statistics. I loved it. That was the first football video game that recorded your stats and let you play as a season. So Tecmo Bowl was really cool, but you just could play a game. It didn't track statistics. It didn't track your record. You didn't, the way that it worked, you didn't like keep track of all the numbers of what was there. Tecmo Super Bowl was the first time that it transitioned there. And then the leap that it made as you went from Nintendo to whether it was PlayStation, Super Nintendo, all the different systems and whatnot, is when you started to get into Madden and playing that through like high school and college. And then even after college, I still played video games and owned a system and would buy Madden every single year, all the way for a long time. It's probably been 10 years for me since I've had a video game system or played, but up until probably, the early 2010s for me was still a huge part of it. And, being in a situation where, there was a while there where it didn't even feel like the Bills were in the NFL. Every game was Sunday at 1:00. We never had primetime games. We didn't have no one's favorite player was on the Buffalo Bills. Like no one outside of Buffalo, their favorite player wasn't on the Bills. To now we have the maximum primetime games and our franchise quarterback is on the cover of Madden. It's so surreal. It's crazy.
It's weird. So I am like a very different spot than I was, similar to you. Like I grew up very much in video games, played a ton of Madden, ton of sports games, lots of online, Xbox 360 in my 20s. Like I worked in a restaurant, so I got home real weird hours, real late and wide awake and played into the late nights, made a bunch of friends on Xbox 360, played a ton. In all those years and went and played tournaments and got in line to get the Maddens, awesome. Right? Like that, stuff like that. But, and in all those years, I would show up to these tournaments and play with the Bills with Trent Edwards. And like, I was such a Bills fan that it was like, I'm going to learn to play with these guys. And some years he had a speed demon that you could like really, TJ Graham. I remember one year was just like really unguardable. in this video game. That's the problem with
I can make Sean Nelson good.
Yeah, exactly. And so you would find some stuff that would help you out. And every once in a while, the Bills would have a good roster. But now I think my 22, 23-year-old self, seeing the franchise quarterback on the roster, seeing the type of rod with a Von Miller, with a Tre'Davious White, with all these guys that are got to be in the 90s. I don't know how the rating system works now, but knowing that you can get online with your favorite team and just that is the team that everyone else wants to be. It's like that one team you face every year. It's going to be fun. I don't get to play as much anymore. I do have a video game system. I still play video games with the kids and stuff. Every once in a while I will download a very cheap like 4-year version back of Madden that goes on sale or something for like $10 and I'll grab it and throw it in. But other than that, I don't get as excited anymore. But to your point, this is what Jack Eichel was supposed to be for the Sabres in the city, right? Like a guy that just changes the way the perception of that organization, that team is, not just locally, but on a national scale, and draw in eyes. And Josh Allen has really done that, whether it's the Gillette commercials and being the national spokesperson for the Gillette stuff. That's a big deal, right? And this one is another big deal. EA is a huge brand. Madden is a huge brand, and they've chosen to make him the face of it for this next year. It's big. It's good for him. It's good for Bills fans. It's good for the Pagulas. Like this type of stuff is really good for business. I know it brings added pressure, and a lot of people will reference like, oh, is his head in it? And the Madden curse and all that stuff. All that stuff's nonsense. This is all good for business, for the Bills, and getting eyes on the product.
100%. And I brought up the example before. My neighbor across the street, he's 11 years old. He is born and raised here in Cleveland. His dad is a crazy Cleveland fan. His mom is born and raised here. They are all only Cleveland fans of all Cleveland teams. He likes the Buffalo Bills, and Josh Allen's his favorite player.
Yeah.
That did not happen. That just did not exist before him. Like there weren't kids like that. Nobody in Idaho just randomly decided, oh, I'm gonna be a JP Lossman fan. Like that just wasn't a thing. So being in this spot is really cool. I won't lie, I did spend a minute. I actually looked online at how much it costs to buy a PS5. We have a Wii in our house. We have a Wii because we play some of the Wii games with our daughter, and played Mario Kart. I still dominate Mario Kart. And I did look at it. I looked at it to be like, do I really want to go get embarrassed by a 12-year-old online, learning like 10 years out of shape, learning how to go play again?
No.
I don't need that in my life. I don't need a 12-year-old talking.
Get a Switch though. Side note. Switches are awesome.
Okay. All right. Duly noted.
Yeah.
So anyways, just something really cool, really fun. And here, Pete bringing it up. Josh Allen, the number one selling, our quarterback is on the cover of Madden and the number one selling jersey in the NFL. That is bananas. It is just so crazy that our franchise player is the number one selling jersey in the league and the cover on the cover of Madden. It's just crazy.
I mean, he dates movie stars. What do you want? Like he's the guy.
This is how life is now.
He's just the guy.
That's how life is now. All right.
Yep.
So, with our, Richard, I'm going to step in.
Tell his wife. Would you let his wife know that he needs more of this stuff?
Well, hey, I won't lie. Some of it's from her.
You're easy to buy for, right?
It is. I am an easy Father's Day coming up here. So as we got ready for this week, the reason we switched tonight to be the defensive line preview is we got the news on Sunday that the Buffalo Bills have extended fifth year defensive tackle Ed Oliver, former number 9 overall pick, who just finished his 4th year with the Bills, to a 4-year, $68 million deal. It takes effect after his 5th year option. So it's a 4-year extension on top of this year, keeping the 5th year option in place. So if you look at it that way, with the 5th year, it's actually like $15.5 million a year of what they're paying him. If you look at that average, that puts him about 16th or 17th. And, I brought it up on a couple other shows and a couple other discussions. A lot of the sites, and you'll see it tonight when I show you some of our position breakdown, sites like Spotrac still have Poona Ford as the defensive end because technically he's an interior defensive lineman for the Seahawks. They list him as a defensive end. If you look at true interior defensive, they list Draymond Jones, who went from Denver to Seattle as a defensive end. He's not. He's a defensive tackle. He's actually closer to the 18th or 19th interior defensive lineman in the league, and that's without extensions coming for Quinn and Williams, extensions coming for Christian Wilkins. There's going to be more guys going there. There's a good chance that by the time the season starts, he could be like the 20th highest paid defensive tackle in the league. So we'll talk a little bit about it, but I think some of the initial sticker shock for the deal, I'll share some of the quick screenshot of it here. There was some concern like, oh my gosh, that sounds like a really big number. When you actually look at how it breaks down, we're going to have almost a $5 million cap hit this year, under a $10 million or $9 million cap hit next year. It's very manageable. And then if he's playing well, they actually have some outs that if they wanted to walk away this year, they actually could walk away after paying him $16 million. They have offset language that if they cut him and another team pays him, it like eats into what they would pay him. So Bean basically set it up that they can make him a $16 million a year guy, 16 this year, 16 next year, 15 and change, 15 and change, 15 and change. They can make him like a $15 to $16 million a year player on basically a year by year contract. We can walk away at just about any point and be okay. And if he's not playing consistently, unfortunately, we may have to do that. If he plays well, would get $20 to $22 million on the open market. Defensive tackles get paid a lot. So I wasn't ecstatic about the deal at first. I was cool with it. I thought it was pretty risky. Now that I saw the outs that he gave himself, I really don't have any complaints. This is what a market deal is for. He's a starting caliber guy. If you want to argue whether he's the 20th best defensive tackle, go ahead, but it's really hard to argue that. I think that this is appropriate. And if he has a good season this year, it actually could be a value like we've seen at plenty of other spots.
Yeah, this one. So a couple things here to unpack. One, I hate when deals come out because the initial reaction, I even texted you, like, where are people getting these numbers? Because we haven't seen numbers, right? And they were doing exactly what you said, where they just take the guaranteed money
divided by 4,
split that up, and everybody's running with this number and it becomes a narrative. And then it's insincere, right? Because everyone sees the dollar amount and they don't understand how it relates to peers. And one thing, if you're watching here online, I am a comparer of peers. Like if you want to have a conversation about anything about football, that's fine. I know you watch a lot of the Bills. I know everybody on Twitter pays a lot of attention to the Bills, but are you paying as close attention to other teams? Because I'm not. And so when I'm going to talk about the Bills and their players, I will reference the rest of the league and how things stack up. And you did a good job of sort of bracing that once these numbers started to come out of how you're framing it at the 15th. And as this goes, and when you really refine this, and once these extensions come, then it can really level out expectations of what this deal is and where it is relative to the market. And then people talked about the guaranteed money right away, Greg. And I know you and I have talked about it a lot, but this, to me, this is the new NFL, and we're just not adjusted to seeing kind of guaranteed money yet.
Real quick on that one. That's the first time I've seen a pretty big okie doke. Usually when these deals come out, you hear the up to number, which I always take with a grain of salt, where I'm like, all right, we'll see what that is. You hear the overall deal and I'm like, all right, that's probably salary and some incentives maybe won't be the cap hit. And then you hear the guaranteed amount. Normally, when they report that, they mean it pretty genuinely.
That's what they're.
It doesn't necessarily mean like it's not always only guaranteed at signing, but normally it's like genuinely guaranteed. When they reported that it's $45 million guaranteed for Ed Oliver, when the details came out, more than half of that are deferred guarantees if he's on the roster after this date, 5 years into the new league year. So the one example, if they released him after this season, he has a $7 million guarantee next year with full offset language. So if any team paid him over $7 million, $8 million, $9 million, $10 million, the Bills would owe him nothing and have zero obligation to him. It's just, that was the first time I really saw that kind of okie doke with the guarantee.
Yeah, but even if it was at the guarantee, yes, a risk, but I think you're going to start seeing these more. And Brandon Beane, kudos to him for making it really good enough for the agent to trumpet that as the success of, hey, I got this guaranteed money, but not, and Brandon Beane not having to give up all Terry's money, right? Like in reality. So how we frame these conversations really frustrates me. And the initial reaction is almost always the same, especially when it's these kind of players that I get why folks are frustrated with Ed Oliver, and he was comped to Aaron Donald and he was picked really high and we expected double-digit sacks and leading the league in production. But one continuous thing we're going to have a conversation here about tonight when it comes to the defensive line is when you're playing for the Buffalo Bills, some of what's baked into the lack of stats and box score stats is these guys are really rotating. Bean talks about it, like they're rotating a lot more than their peers. Like the percentages of snaps and how guys are playing. We'll get to it later, but like Groot leads defensive ends for Buffalo in snaps, but he was like 50th or something of defensive ends in the league. You know what I mean? So you're not going to be able to put up the type of statistics consistently that you are against your peers. And I feel like Bills players are judged just by that stat line, and it's not baked into how they're really used. So good value here for Ed, really good player. I did do some comparison breakdowns if you want to get into also outside of the comp wise math with the numbers.
Some of the comps I know that you're going to bring up here, people talked about, you brought up Aaron Donald. I mean, he's not Aaron Donald. He's not Jeffrey Simmons. Like Jeffrey Simmons has been a dominant player, but he's not paid like them. You want to know who he's not paid
Quinn
like?
Williams. Yeah.
He's right in between Draymond Jones and Zach Allen. You want to tell me, everybody listening here, you watched a lot of Zach Allen tape last year? How about this? How many people listening right now know what team Zach Allen played for last year and who he signed with this year? Because he signed for $16.75 million a year. Because that's what defensive tackles get paid. Draymond Jones, some people might know, played for Denver and signed with Seattle, but he signed for slightly less than that. So that's the neighborhood we're talking about here. He didn't sign for Chris Jones money. He didn't sign for Jonathan Allen money. He didn't sign for Jeffrey Simmons money. He signed for Zach Allen money. I'm okay with Zach Allen money.
Yeah, and I think it's still fair to compare him to those guys that he was drafted with in terms of how has that investment shaken out.
Absolutely.
Bills, right?
Those guys were drafted after him and they played better than him.
Yes. And so I think that is why people compare, but I agree with you in terms of the value on that contract. We don't need him to play like these guys at this point. Now that we're past that rookie valuation, we just need him to play on where he's valued at, which I think he does. But with these guys, I also, again, he's got 2,600 snaps. Most of the rest of these guys are in the 3,000s, outside of Quinn and Williams, who struggled to get on the field a little bit early and has some injury issues. His stats, really the one that I want to show is PRP, which I think when you're just doing baseline statistical comparisons, none of it's going to be perfect. All of it lacks
a pretty good spot.
A lot of context. But what I did here was over their 4-year period. And so I don't have PRP actually on this one, but people watching, you can look at some of the stuff, and Ed Oliver shapes up really well. And down below here, I have him against the averages, which we'll talk about. But PRP is a good stat by PFF where it takes all the hits, pressures, sacks, any type of pressure on a quarterback versus how often they're rushing the quarterback. Ed Oliver was a 5.4. Quinn and Williams, who everybody I think agrees is one of the top 3, top 5, he was a 6.02, right? That's the high level here. Christian Wilkins, 4.08. Dexter Lawrence, 5.5. Jeffrey Simmons, 5.08. This is over this 4-year span of their first 4 years. Like, he's right in line with all of these guys who we're talking about highly, but he's rotating at a 50% clip. He spent almost an entire year last year injured, right? With a calf injury or ankle injury, calf injury, pec injury. The averages here at the bottom, Greg, these match out pretty well. He's under in snaps. He's over in pressures on average. He's tied in sacks, although PFF doesn't. I got a lot of pushback on this. He has 14 half sacks, but they don't grade half sacks. But that's for everyone.
He was involved in the quarterback being sacked 20
Correct.
times.
And so the other pushback I gave the people that were giving me a hard time is I used PFF stats for all of this. So everybody's half sacks also got added.
Fully right? Yeah. So, no other site has Quinn and Williams at 31 or Jeffrey Simmons at 27.
Yes.
And so, when you say average, I think some people are, well, average isn't what we want. You're not talking the average of all defensive tackles. You're talking about the average of these top guys,
really
not at all highly regarded, highly drafted players.
Yeah. So I wanted to look at how is he compared to all of them. Then how is he compared to how they average out? And I don't know if it's good data or not, but it was interesting to me because he's right in line there. Hits, he's over. Hurries, he's a little bit under 101 to 99, but he's right there. That's within the margin of error. Tackles, very much under. I think this is where you would want to maybe see more. The average there is 130 for the others. He's at 111, but still, whatever. That's fine. The missed tackle percentage is right there. His stops are pretty close. The average is 115. He's at 103. Like, this is a good player who has flaws, and we could talk about those. But the conversation about him needs to be framed in the context that the contract is actually a pretty good value. I don't think it's crazy risk. I think it'll pay off. Brady Brandon Beane was right. He's been good and probably has his best football ahead of him.
So when you look at this and where he is, you can argue statistically, does he slot in as the 4th best player on this list, the 5th best player on this list? I'm not sure.
I don't
He's in
know.
that range.
Yeah.
You want to know what's interesting? He's going to be paid the least of the 9 players on the
Right.
screen. All 8 other players here are going to be paid more than him. So all of a sudden now it's like, oh, well, when you view it in that lens, that he's producing as much or on average what this group is being paid, and they're all producing, and they're all going to get paid more than him. Now, all of a sudden, it brings it into context that, okay, you know, do I wish that we also had Jeffrey Simmons and that we had a guy that we needed to pay $23.5 million a year? Of course I do. That would be awesome. I wish that that's what we had. I wish we had the problem of how we're going to fit in Chris Jones is $27.5 million. That would be awesome. But just because we paid Ed Oliver the appropriate market rate for, again, the 15th to 20th best defensive tackle in the league doesn't mean it was some disaster or something bad. We paid a player what he's worth. There's risk on both sides. If he remains inconsistent, we're probably not going to be that happy with the deal. And in 2 years, we're probably talking about whether we need to get out of it. If he has a Tremaine Edmonds, where if we had this exact same conversation 1 year ago, we would be in a situation where we were debating, oh my gosh, I can't believe they paid Tremaine Edmonds that money already. Instead, we didn't. He played great, had a really good 5th year, and then he priced himself out of our market. If he had that same kind of Tremaine Edmonds leap, but at defensive tackle instead of linebacker, that's $22.5 million. That's what that's going to pay him. It's over $20 million. And instead, we got him for $15 million in change with where it is.
Yeah, no, I think it's going to look more and more like a value here. That initial reaction's not going to look great, I don't think, for most people. And he's going to continue to put up at least at the pace that he's been. And I think he will grow. We saw really good production. We can get into when we get in the line out of DaQuan Jones last year. And I think a healthy Oliver with Jones and the continued improvement of Groot, like everyone around him is also getting better. And I know people use that as a flaw against that Oliver, that, well, he needs this and that to be the best player that he can be. So he's not a one, freak guy that can take on one-on-ones. Well, you know what? Like, we praise Kyle Williams. He wasn't really productive until he got Mario Williams and Marcel Darius. And that's when he started to have his actual best years and really shine in defenses. It's okay for good players to play better when other players are around them. Like that's not, it shouldn't be used against the player because they're a little bit undersized and they need a player to take double teams. Like that's part of being an undersized 3-tech. There's a lot of those guys out there.
So the fun part is, before we get into the rest of the defensive line preview, we had more news. The reason that I showed you that contract breakdown for Ed Oliver was he went from $10.75 million in cap hit down to 4.9. They freed up about $5.8 million in cap space. Well, the very next day, we wake up to breaking news at 7:45 in the morning, breakfast with Bean. The Buffalo Bills signed pass rusher Leonard Floyd. We've been talking for a while here. Leonard Floyd was on that list. You kept referencing my top 5. Those 5 guys I kept talking about where we wanted, it was Justin Houston, it was Leonard Floyd, it was Yannick Ngakoue, Melvin Ingram, or Robert Quinn. There was a bunch of guys below there. There's like 11 or 12 veteran edge rushers that were available, and we talked about, well, we don't really know if those guys move the needle. If we sign a Carl Nassib or something like that, does that really do anything? But man, if we could get one of those 5, I don't care which 5, just one of those 5. And honestly, I know Eric, who, if anybody hasn't seen it yet, the day the man signed, he already did an awesome 15-minute breakdown that is going to get you really excited. I'll put it in the show notes here. It's an awesome film breakdown. Make sure you check it out. Eric kind of talked about, like, well, Floyd and Quinn are probably going to be priced out of our range. They'd be really, really nice, but we're probably only going to be able to afford a Justin Houston or a Melvin Ingram. So let's focus on them. It'd be great if we could get a guy like Floyd, but we probably just can't afford it. So now to get a guy like that who, the last 3 years, he's had 29 sacks. That's 10th in the NFL. He has over 180 pressures, which is 10th in the NFL. You're talking about, this is not some like nice to have guy. When Von Miller's not ready yet and on the PUP to start the season, this is our best pass rusher. He comes in and immediately is our best pass rusher. I would love for Groot to push him for that and make that an argument. This is a guy that comes in and is bendy, crazy ability to turn the corner, crazy. You'll see in Eric's video, crazy ankle flexion, and the domino effect this has with especially the what we talked about, losing Von for a period of time, of being able to let everybody else slot in afterwards. And then, good Lord, wait till we talk about what it allows us to do when Von Miller and Leonard Floyd are both available. This is like a sneaky, really impactful signing to happen on June 6th. It's crazy.
Yeah, I think, the last big remaining need outside of not knowing who the middle linebacker is going to be, right? You knew they weren't going to add to the middle linebacker. That's set. So in terms of additions coming to the team, it really was trying to find that edge. I will say I had him at the back of that top 5 because of value. Like I had Houston and Ingram as they still have production, and it seemed to be in that mercenary mode where they were willing to take a little less. So they were really my targets. And so surprised and happily surprised when it
obviously
was Floyd.
the important part right now is it costs us $2.6 million this year. It is a $7 million deal. He can make up to $9 million with incentives.
Perfect.
We did use all these other cap tricks to spread it out with void years, but the important part is we fit him in for only $2.6 million this year. We'll pay an extra 1.4 each year for the next 3 years. We'll deal with that when it comes. But for that amount, I'm good.
One of the things I thought was funny this week is I normally take Brandon Beane at face value and believe the things that he says is mostly truth to the point that he can tell it, right? I don't believe him at all for a second, not even a little bit, that this move wasn't at least some insurance on Von Miller. He said it had nothing to do with whether or not they think Von Miller is going to be ready to play or when that is impactful, and that they would have done this whether or not Von Miller got hurt.
Liar,
I can't believe that is not even close. If Von Miller doesn't get hurt, they're not making this move. Right?
So now the benefit, so I agree. If they don't, he probably would. I still wanted another piece to be added. I agree that I don't think it would have been the urgency, and I don't think we would have seen it. And the benefit we'll get, again, we'll transition here away from just the Floyd and Ed talk and get into the full defensive line, is when Von comes back, now having the flexibility of what you can create in these lineups is just crazy. To have those two guys bending off the edge and having, whatever it is, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert, or obviously Patrick Mahomes, trying to get away from these two crazy freak athletes is really special. That's going to give us a ton of flexibility.
It is. I want something you said. I'm going to push back on you. It's a very small pushback on you. And I'm not in the right yet. I don't have a great defense of this totally yet. A little bit of one. Groot, I think, will this time next year, I think Groot will be the better pass rusher, and I think he is right now. I think I just need to be proven right.
I hope you're right. I will say I feel pretty comfortable that still at 30 years old, he hasn't even turned 31 yet.
Groot doesn't have the
years
yet.
Of 10.5, 9.5, 9 sacks, and just super, especially he has no. I'm not talking badly of our lovely Jordan Phillips. He doesn't have any Jordan Phillips seasons where it was like, oh my gosh, he had 9.5 sacks on 28 pressures. He had 9.5 sacks on 73 pressures. He had 10 sacks on 68 pressures. So that's the big pieces. We haven't seen that level of pressure creation from Groot yet. I think that he has the skill set to be able to surpass him.
We haven't seen
the ability to do that.
We haven't seen it with consistency, and it doesn't show up in the same way. Right. So the comp wise, watching them is not going to be the same. Floyd is going to give you more traditional pass rush, twitchier stuff.
He's not as powerful as Groot is.
I do think so, at least from the PFF data here. Leonard Floyd on 932 snaps had 54 pressures, 9 sacks. Groot on 552 snaps had 51 pressures and 9 sacks, but the PRP for them is where the big difference is. So the PRP again, and that's combines sacks, hits, hurries from PFF, is 6.8 for Floyd, and Groot came in at 9.2. He was only one Von Miller was 9.3 playing at an elite level before he got hurt. Groot was for the whole season at 9.2. Like he was really performing pass rush at a high level last year. And so I do think we're trending in the direction of getting the type of production that you're looking for out of Groot. And I'm excited about that.
Well, getting to the point where I want it to be difficult for Sean McDermott to decide who's playing where down the stretch going into the playoffs. It's like, oh my God, and we'll get into it when we talk about whatever our new version of the NASCAR is in AK Cash right here. The fact that we're going to have the option to kick Groot into 3-tech and have it be Ed Oliver, Gregory Rousseau, Leonard Floyd, and Von Miller playing games and twisting back and forth where all four of them can keep contained. All four of them have the power to loop inside. All four of them can beat their man one-on-one. You're talking about those four in, a pass rush mode on 3rd and 8, and behind them our new dime look where you can have Milano and Taron Johnson and Taylor Rapp in the middle with the secondary around them with Micah Hyde back healthy, Jordan Poyer, Kyer Elam, and Trey White. That is a special defense and the chance to get really excited about the way we can close out games. So let's do defensive tackles first, and then we'll get into the edge group. So again, really excited. I didn't think we were going to be able to sign a player like Leonard Floyd, so I'm ecstatic. I think it's a great addition.
Yeah.
We'll start with the defensive tackles. Obviously our starting group is locked in. It's Ed Oliver and DaQuan Jones. Ed Oliver will be the 3-tech, DaQuan Jones the 1-tech.
Yep.
The nice part is we now actually have a functional 1-tech backup. We signed Poona Ford, who is a phenomenal run defender. Probably isn't quite as good as DaQuan is at like anchoring and like you can't even move DaQuan Jones against a double team, but Poona is probably a little more versatile and able to have a little bit other moves and versatility that DaQuan doesn't have, but he's also really good against the run. He's not like Tim Settle or Jordan Phillips, where it's, they look like a 1-tech, but they only play like a 3-tech. Poona Ford looks like a 1-tech. You're going to see him rub his big belly, but he actually can move like a 3-tech and do both things, but he's better as a 1-tech. He has some versatility.
Yeah.
In that 3-tech group, we still have Jordan Phillips and Tim Settle. We have those 5. There's other names, Eli Anko, Cortez Bryant, Kendall Vickers, DJ Dale. But those 5 are a really, really stellar group in that spot.
Yeah. And this is, like you said, it's an interesting group in terms of we know it's going to be a rotation, right? And DaQuan Jones and Ed Oliver are really probably up there in the top.
They played a ton last year.
They played a ton, and they're probably closer in that top like pairing on the interior defensive line than we think they are, right? ESPN's run stop rate or run win percentage, they're both top 5 in that for the season. They're both, again, we talk about this rotation is going to come up a lot. Ed Oliver was 23rd in total pressures as a defensive line, and he was I thought I had snaps there. DaQuan Jones was 32nd most snaps, but he was still 31st in total pressures among interior defensive linemen. We think of him as this big 1-tech, and he is. He can do all those things, but here in Buffalo, he's really sort of also morphed into a penetrating 1-tech, which is the one thing Star Lotulelei was never able to do. We defended Star a lot in terms of he can anchor, and that's really about all he can do. He wasn't going to also penetrate, where Jones has become more of a pocket. Yeah, he's become more of it, and now you add Poona Ford sort of in that same.
Who also can do the same thing.
Correct.
Can push the center back into
still be your 1-tech, still be that big body, but still give you that pushing, and that's really what they lost when they lost Jones in the playoffs. So having a little bit of a backup juice there, really good to build with. But I think you have great starters, and Jordan Phillips. This is the perfect role for him. One, to stay healthy and not have to be a big part of the rotation, and get back into just being that penetrating guy that comes in and fills in for Ed Oliver. I think it's a really nice mix that gives you enough size outside of Ed Oliver, but also players that are similar to each other. So when one gets hurt, you don't run into the issues that they've run into in the past.
We obviously saw every time DaQuan was out of the game, and especially that Cincinnati playoff game, it was just a huge noticeable thing. So not only will we not need DaQuan to play the 60-70% of snaps he was playing, we might even be barely over 50 each. We'll go through there. I want to go back real quick. We kept that Beta Jim question up there for a minute. So he was asking, can you go over the difference between 1-tech and 3-tech? I'm not going to get super nerdy here, but so when you talk about techniques along the defensive line, you start in the very center. If a guy is lined up dead center over the center, that's a zero technique. Ed Oliver actually played zero technique in college at Houston. When you run a 3-4 defense, think about like old school Ted Washington, Sam Adams, those kind of guys where you just line them up in the center's face and they push back and you got to get double teamed from one way or the other. A one tech is shaded off to one side, usually to the strong side of the formation. So a one tech is shaded off to that side, usually either in the gap between the guard and center or shaded off of the center. So you don't hear two very often. There is a 2I as a position that's like heads up on the guard. Normally you hear 3 technique. So 3 technique is shaded outside of the guard, on the guard, but outside the guard, between the guard and tackle. Where they line up isn't as important. That's the name. That's what the role is. That's where you'll see them. In our defense, one technique is to hold the line, try to take up double teams, don't get moved back, hold the point of attack, and push the pocket back. The 3 technique is the one who's supposed to slice through and penetrate, cause disruption in the backfield. So think Sam Adams, Pat Williams, Ted Washington versus Kyle Williams. Kyle Williams is a really good 3 technique because he was super good at, swimming through and being able to just cause havoc and disruption in the backfield. Sometimes guys can penetrate too far and blah, blah, blah. Jordan Phillips sometimes does it where he'll cause a problem, but he'll just run past everybody. So that's what Ed's really good at, is he's actually better than people think at being stout and holding the point of attack, but he can be really disruptive and just blow stuff up. So when 1 tech and 3 tech, 1 tech, big, hold the point of attack, stay where you are, take on the double team. 3 tech, knife in there and blow things up in the backfield. That's the main difference that you'll notice. The name of it is technically where they line up. Then you go to 5 tech is like heads up on the tackle, like a 3-4 defensive end. Normally we see guys outside in a 6-eye, or when you hear wide 9 is a 9 technique, like even outside the tight end, looping way around from the outside. That's what those numbers are, the alignment and the spot that they line up. You'll notice it from their job and their role more often.
You said you were going to get nerdy. You got a little nerdy.
I can't help it.
You got a little excited.
All right, so with the rest of this defensive line group, one thing that stuck out to me with Brandon Beane's presser, I kind of assumed that the surgery kind of fixed things up. He kind of talked about Jordan Phillips in the same breath that he did Von Miller about PUP, and that was the first time I had really considered that as a thing.
This rarely happens to me, but while listening to that press conference, I must have been distracted by a kid or something. So I missed exactly what was said here, because this got brought up in a mention before, and I meant to go back before the show here and watch that Bean presser. So what was said about both of those guys in the pup? Because I also heard him talk about you have to be careful with how tight they are up against the cap and who you put where, right?
Yeah. So he's pretty conservative about those things. He was talking about guys who are still on the side watching now.
Yeah.
And talked about that it may result in being on the physically unable to perform list going into the season. But he talked about Von Miller and Jordan Phillips the same. And I didn't have
Does
them
that
in
mean
the same
Von's
boat. Yes. So either
that mean everybody's ahead of schedule?
Yeah. So it's just the first time I had heard it phrased like that, where I was like, oh, okay. Maybe we have to stash Jordan Phillips too, which weirdly, we have so much defensive line depth that if we open up the season with DaQuan Jones and Poona Ford, with Ed Oliver and Tim Settle, it's probably fine. And if we also have Von Miller on the PUP, so we'll get to the edges here, but you're talking about some of the guys that are there, some of the guys like Shaq Lawson and Boogie Basham, that maybe they're there to rotate in at 3 tech with Tim Settle as the backup 3 tech, and Poona Ford maybe getting some additional opportunity at 3 tech. It's crazy that, we might be able to just bring Von Miller and Jordan Phillips along slowly and nobody will really notice. That's crazy.
It's wild. I can't tell.
So I don't want to get ahead of myself. He might just have been conservative. That might not actually be the case. And maybe Jordan Phillips is ready to rock in training camp. So here, Nikki saying he did comment Jordan should be ready for training camp. That's a good sign.
I thought I did hear something about like both those guys, they're expecting like ramping up into August, into training camp, something like that.
Hopefully that's the case.
Yeah.
Now let's say they're all healthy, we actually go the opposite route where we're getting pretty tight up against it, where you're either
Yeah.
talking about 10 defensive linemen, which we've seen on occasion. Normally it's been 9, but we have 10 absolutely roster caliber defensive linemen that it's going to be tough. I think
Not if you
all
trade
5
them.
I think all 5 are pretty much locks for it, but I
Yeah.
did, when I put out my list yesterday of, hey, don't get too crazy here, but here's some names that could come up in that, cut down day trade candidate list. We'll talk about Dane Jackson when we get to the cornerbacks, but I did put him on that list, and I put Tim
I saw it.
Settle. Tim Settle, I think, is a name that is a playable guy, and his contract is more tradable than it is cuttable. We could trade it and actually save $2.9 million. I don't think it's completely out of the question that we could trade Tim Settle. I think we keep all 5. I think Jordan Phillips' shoulder is the reason for it, but it did pop in my mind that maybe he's on that list.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense that maybe somebody still has a high value on him too, that you can convince them to give you some late round pick.
So
I think that's
O-line, D-line, corner. It's the premium positions that that anyone ever considers trading for.
for sure. I can see it. And let's go over to this edge group. And there's probably a couple names here that are definitely going to have
more
to,
so at the edge group.
I think most likely out of this grouping is probably going to be one of the names that's definitely floated out there for a trade. So
we talked about it there. Obviously, the one techs are there. The backup, Tim Settle and Jordan Phillips, are both 3 tech. They should not be playing 1 tech. They are not good at it, but they're both disruptive guys who can play 3 tech at a big size. It's a good thing to have. We're good with it. When you switch to the defensive end group, everybody healthy, you're going to have Von Miller with Gregory Rousseau. You'll have Leonard Floyd as one of the main bendy pass rushers there. Shaq Lawson, more of the Gregory Rousseau backup. I think it's debatable if Shaq Lawson would be 4 or AJ Epenesa. Last year, when Von got hurt, it was Shaq Lawson who played more snaps than AJ Epenesa. So as of now, I'm going to have Shaq Lawson as defensive end 4. AJ Epenesa played more snaps and more productive than Boogie Basham, but we are getting into the final contract year. At that 5th spot, we have Boogie Basham. There's some other interesting names. We claim Cameron Klein from Indy. He's a practice squad guy. Everybody loves Kingsley Jonathan. He's a practice squad guy. Shane Ray was a really fun signing. He's very much my Duke Johnson practice squad defensive end guy. Maybe he might not even make the practice squad. Those top 5 are where the interesting part is. And I absolutely think that AJ Epenesa and Boogie Basham, I'll go as far as to say, I think one of those 2 is going to be traded.
Yeah, I agree with the last comment that I think AJ Epenesa so far probably has presented the most value for a trade.
6.5 sacks last year and 35% of snaps. Someone could talk themselves into that.
I
like him more than Boogie. I probably unfairly harbor some resentment that Boogie is not Creed Humphrey, but I can't undo that in my brain. That's a me problem. That's not a him problem. That's a me problem.
Pressures wise though, AJ had 30, Boogie had 24. He had more sacks.
Closer than I like to admit, probably.
The hurries, AJ had 20, Boogie had 17. So they're playing maybe a little bit closer, I think, than we think. But here I think PRP, I didn't even have Boogie's registered because he didn't show up. So his pressure per snap is not the same, but AJ
5.1. Boogie's 5.1.
5.1. Okay. AJ's a 6.8. That's the same. We were just talking about Leonard Floyd.
But Boogie's the lowest out of that group.
Yeah. Yeah, and that makes sense. And I think that you see it that way. But what he's asked to do versus what AJ Epenesa is asked to do should generate those types of numbers, right? But I think pressures are going to matter more than the skill set that Boogie Basham provides in terms of trade value. So to me, when we're talking about these lists, I feel like he's at the top right now of the list of valuable, like still a young guy. Maybe a team has a high draft grade on him, and he's flashed enough pressure production.
Not really recouping the day 2 pick or anything like that.
No.
Maybe you get a late 4th or a 5th rather than a 6th or a conditional 7th.
Yeah, you've lost value. It's time to cut a little bit bait. You've got the meat on the roster now to
Cody
feel
Ford.
more comfortable with it.
Cody Ford getting back a 5th was better than nothing.
Yeah, and that makes it, if you can continue to do that as Brandon Beane on the misses that you get, then that softens the misses a little bit. Like, it doesn't make up for it, but we know what Brandon Beane's going to do with all these extra picks that he's getting and extra additional stock that he's going to trade up. He's shown us time and time again he can't hold on to picks. He wants to trade up and go get it. So give himself ammo. You cut bait on something. So I still like AJ though. I do think
if it's up to me, we trade Boogie and we keep AJ as our 4th, 5th defensive end.
I would like to keep him. I think so. Another
we know
thing,
the beginning of the year is without Vaughn, so at the beginning of the year it'd be DN4 and playing a fair amount.
Sure, although Shaq Lawson again took the majority of those snaps last year. I don't know if they would continue on that path. But what we do, Leonard Floyd is also a good case study for the idea of how we perceive development, right? Like we're excited to get him now after those 3 years with the Rams, but there was a lot of question marks after those years with Chicago. And the context of why the lack of production met his draft stock, you can debate that and argue that. But the fact is, he didn't, and those fans weren't happy, and that organization wasn't happy with what they were getting out of him. And then he goes somewhere, or the scheme changes to it where he's used more appropriately, or he figures something out, develops more of a pass rush game, puts it together, puts the game together. It takes different time for different folks, but he doesn't develop into year 5, 6, where he really came into his prime.
Immediately came into 10.5, 9.5, 9 sacks after he was good. He had 22 sacks in his first 4 years, but it was 7, 5, 7, had one with 3. So
it's like AJ Epenesa. No, but I'm not making that comp.
But for Chicago, understandably, similar to Ed Oliver, Leonard Floyd couldn't shake the fact that he was the 9th overall pick.
Yes.
He was the 9th overall pick. They expected it was supposed to be, oh my gosh, we have Khalil Mack and now we have Leonard Floyd. We have these game-wrecking guys.
Freak athlete was supposed to just translate immediately.
And instead he was good.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, he was good and developed as time went on and wasn't given enough time probably.
If he had done what he did in LA instead and just been a 9.5, 10 sack a year guy, Chicago would have been ecstatic. It just he didn't do it till he got to LA.
Yeah, and some of that happens more often than we think. I think as fans and media, we set these like 2 weird 1.5, 2 year expectations where if guys haven't hit what we expect them to be, that now we're talking about this guy as a bust and they can't really shake that, and it's not fair. Ed Oliver's not far off from Quinn and Williams. Eric and I were talking offline, like, the consistency isn't there, and he's not getting those 3 to 4 pressures a game, but he is getting 2 pressures a game. Like the margins are slim and he's really close to being there. And I think we have to frame our conversation about some of these guys that haven't developed maybe yet.
One quick one. I know Spin brought it up here and it's been brought up by a ton of people, whether it's defensive tackles or defensive ends. Like, oh my gosh, we have no defensive tackles and only 3 defensive ends under contract for next year. Just as a point of reference from last year's team, this is after free agency started. After free agency started, we re-signed 16 players from last year's team. Like, it's not, you can have guys on an expiring deal last year and then re-sign. We do it all the time. We are going to extend a ton of guys. I'll put money that DaQuan Jones and probably Poona Ford and maybe Leonard Floyd and like Shaq Lawson again, Jordan Phillips again. Like lots of these guys who are on expiring deals are going to come back. Like not all of them, but plenty of them. We're not going to have an empty roster
lined up.
Please. We'll get to that later in a later show. So here, the really exciting part is we have guys with versatility at different positions. They're able to play different roles. We now have 2 bendy edge rushers. We have AJ Epenesa shown the ability to do that. We have guys who are, we can set up a lineup against Tennessee or New England in big heavy rundowns. Well, you want to know what? Here, go ahead against this. We're going to have Gregory Rousseau and Shaq Lawson on the outside. We're going to have DaQuan Jones and Poona Ford defensive tackle. Those are going to be our 4 defensive linemen. Go ahead and run against Gregory Rousseau, DaQuan Jones, Poona Ford, and Shaq Lawson. Best of luck. Go ahead and run against that. Oh, it's 3rd and 9, and you're going to come out there in a empty set with 5 receivers? Okay. We're going to have Von Miller, Leonard Floyd, Ed Oliver, and Gregory Rousseau. They're going to be coming after you pass rushing. The versatility we've given ourselves to be able to flex back and forth with different guys stepping in, not all the pressure on everybody, being able to keep everybody fresh as the season goes, letting, Leonard Floyd not having to play 1,000 snaps. And some of those numbers are impacted. I'm not going to say deflated or false. He was out there on the field, but when you're out in coverage and dropping as a linebacker, some of that efficiency as a pass rusher isn't going to be the same. And some of those snaps are not the same kind of pass rush when you're in, and that's exactly what you're doing and going after it and playing those kind of games. So the versatility they've created, the depth on this defensive line, the fact that we're probably going to trade one or two of these guys and still have a really good defensive line with the possibility of, an Eli Ankow and a, Shane Ray on the practice squad is a really, really cool problem to have.
Yeah, no, for sure. We went from a couple months ago being very worried about this unit to this being a super exciting show to get ready for. And it's not just the names that have already performed well, but there is excitement in the development here. And I think the big thing that we didn't talk about is I think there's a lot of pressure on Eric Washington right now, right? Like the Bills have performed
huge amount of resources,
but they still, even with Von Miller and the way he was playing at a really elite level in terms of pressures and sacks. They haven't been that team consistently that is at the top of getting sacks and getting to the quarterback and really leading the league in that type of stuff. Not in the way necessarily that the Eagles did, because that was kind of like crazy historic what they did, but just being a team that's consistently getting to the quarterback and getting him down. Now he has not only draft resources, but every type of resource that the Bills can offer at the defensive line, they've given them. And they've given them, to your point, the interchangeability of you have the flexibility in personnel to be versatile and to match the moments that we see. Like there's no excuses for what you can put out there in the type of production that should be expected. Like he's got to perform at a pretty high level, right?
Well, and now we're in a position where whether it's Eric Washington or I'm going to bring in Sean McDermott here, we can play around with different things. You can do odd fronts where you have DaQuan Jones as a zero right on the center and use Poona Ford as like the four tech that he was in Seattle, playing like a 3-4, and you have, and then you have a regular edge on the other side. Maybe put Ed Oliver out there in a four tech, and then you have Leonard Floyd and Von Miller coming off the edge, and you have that kind of 5-man front like a 3-4 defensive end, because you want to know what? Leonard Floyd did drop back into coverage a few hundred times last year and did pretty well. And the one that Eric showed where he flexed out and was heads up on George Kittle and chucked him and tackled Christian McCaffrey out in the open field. You're talking about a versatile athlete that can do a lot of different things. I don't want him playing linebacker a whole lot. I want him to get paid to come get quarterbacks.
Yep.
But the fact that we could line up in something we didn't have the personnel to do before, and we could put that out there, and you don't know who's dropping back into a hook zone, who's covering the flat, and who's coming after the quarterback. And it just gives you versatility and capability. Also, because we talked about this with Tremaine Edmonds, we'll get into it more with the linebacker show. Having Tremaine Edmonds was a blessing. He was very good at what he did, but it also was a curse that you kind of felt obligated to let him play that zone in the middle because he was so good at it. Now we're going to have guys that, well, screw it, we might as well blitz them every once in a while because they're better at that, and they're not as good as covering the huge space that he did in the middle. We're going to see more games from the aggression that we've seen from Sean McDermott everywhere he's gone. Philadelphia and Carolina, much higher blitz rates than Leslie Frazier did, while still having a 4-man front and a zone defense. Those, we're still going to be a base nickel. We're still going to run more zone than man. We're still going to do a 4-man front more often. But now we can have some dime. Now we can have some odd man fronts. And now we will see more blitzes. That combination is really exciting.
It is. I am not going to let you get me too excited for it yet. You're convincing, you're passionate, you're handsome, and you deliver the message well. But I think I'm nervous that the changes aren't going to be as exciting and frequent as I would like to see them with the type of guys that they've brought in, right? We talk about this versatility of a Taylor Rapp. We talk about the type of things that you can do. And I see it, the things you're saying, but I think they're going to be very specific in the moments that they choose to do it. And I think the defense is going to look continuously similar. But to your point, we'll see more blitzes from cornerbacks.
It would be a significant shift for Sean McDermott not to call blitzes, because every time he's been the defensive play caller, he called significantly more blitzes than Leslie Frazier did. So if he doesn't, that will be a significant shift for him
But
because he did that much more often when he was calling defense.
I'm talking in terms of like personnel and packages and
Sure.
coverages. I think it'll be still, like you said, it's going to be primarily nickel. We'll see a lot of quarters coverages, a lot of the same stuff, a lot of looks that feel real vanilla and that are going to frustrate people. But I think it'll be in the same types of ways that how they attack the Chiefs in that big moment and bringing out that dime look. And maybe you go into a game versus a team like that, versus the Bengals, where you run it out 15%, 30% of the time, just more often to try to get those looks. But I think they'll still run the defense in a similar manner, just a more aggressive version of it.
It's certainly possible. I actually probably even think there's a good argument to say that that's likely. My one reason I don't think it'll be the case is I think Taylor Rapp's too good to play 8% of snaps, 12% of snaps. I think he's better than that. And how about this? I think he's too good to be sat down for whoever the winner of that linebacker job is. Because that's the guy coming off the field. It's not Taron Johnson. It's not Leonard Floyd. It's one of Terrell Dodson, Terrell Bernard, or Dorian Williams. That's the guy that instead of that linebacker, we're so used to the fact that it was Matt Milano and Tremaine Edmonds 100% of snaps no matter what all the time. Now what I think it's going to be is Matt Milano 100% of snaps, the winner of that linebacker job 70% of snaps, and now we see more dime because that linebacker is going to sit down, because bringing in Taylor Rapp for Dorian Williams, bringing in Taylor Rapp for Terrell Bernard, bringing in Taylor Rapp for Terrell Dodson is that big. It's not taking Tremaine Edmonds off the field. It's yeah, that guy's actually there. So the reason I think that is not because we're shifting away from nickel. It's that swap isn't actually that big of. It's not really changing it. You're going to call it dime because he's a safety, but he's just going to come in and play that other spot. He's just going to come in and play that other role of what that guy was doing. And I think he's too good relative, like you said, relative to who that other linebacker is. I don't think that other linebacker is going to win that job and all of a sudden just play 100% of snaps. I do not think that's the case.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I think we'll know early on here in camp if stuff like that is going to be.
If Taylor, we're going to know is Taylor Rapp a thing or not relatively quickly.
Yeah, soon. So.
All right. So you were right. This was a ton of fun. This is a really fun show. I'm really glad that we shuffled it around the way that we did. The news made it.
You know why we shuffled this around also? To give Stephon Diggs some time to show up, because he doesn't have to show up till the 13th. So why would we do a show about wide receivers before he shows up?
Obviously, it's really well said.
Yeah.
So obviously this is a ton of fun. Again, going through all those different things. If you wanted to hear our thoughts on that and the breakdown from Eric and all the different pieces, you want to know who heard about that first? Our guys in the Cover One OnePass. The people in the Slack channel, they were there. You get all kinds of other cool stuff like stickers and t-shirts and everything that's there, but you also get first dibs on all of the content that's out there, first views of the articles, first thoughts from us when we're sharing different things, going in there and explaining the contracts and all the different pieces, wanting to have a good time. It's your best way to do it. I've actually had a bunch of people. I had a handful of different fans that, as people were asking lots of questions about the contracts and how it worked, a handful of them shared the Salary Cap 101 series that I did for OnePass members to be able to come in and understand what a void year is, understand how incentives work, understanding how proration of signing bonuses and option bonuses work. And it was really cool to be able to see other people share that. And it made me feel good that I knew people were actually watching it.
Yeah, that is awesome. That's a great story. And two, this would be a great Father's Day gift.
Ooh.
If you haven't gotten a Father's Day gift yet, right?
Like,
what dad doesn't want to be in OnePass Club Access, right?
Find out all the cool stuff ahead of time. Do you have a dad that doesn't love Twitter and gets annoyed with social media and would like to just talk to informed, like smart Bills fans who actually know what they're talking about and not crazy trolls all the time? Do you have a dad who likes wearing Bills shirts but wants something a little bit different, that when somebody sees them out there and says, oh, that's a guy who knows what he's talking about, he's a Cover One OnePass member, this is for you. Come and gift your dad a Cover One OnePass membership, $57. That number is going to go up because this year is Super Bowl 58, so we're going to have to raise the price pretty soon.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe even more than that. But we got to pay for all these stats, man, that we're giving people. But
all the research we do, all the access we have. And on a serious note, when some people ask very genuinely, what can we do to help you guys? It's these two things. Titan said it right here. You guys know how the algorithm works on these websites. You come in, you press the like button. It's how you let people know what's going on. You leave a comment after you're listening here. Let us know what your favorite part was. Are you more excited about the Ed Oliver extension or the signing of Leonard Floyd? And two, when people ask us, how can you help us out? The reason we have access to all these things is because some of them are expensive. You guys help pay for that when you sign up for OnePass. You help us get access to these different sites to have the data, to have the research, to have the film, to have the analysis of all the things that are there. You guys help us support that when you contribute to us through OnePass. You help us keep those things and to help us create the content that we do for you.
Yep. Yep. Well said. I think the internet's going to kick us off here soon, so we gotta wrap it up till the next time, right?
All right, guys, we appreciate it very, very much. This has been a ton of fun. Next week, we will get back on schedule and be talking about things like wide receivers and Stephon Diggs and Gabriel Davis and touchdowns and all those kind of things. People that Josh Allen throws the football to. Our awesome producer, Chris Kepner, was bringing up all your comments here and getting everything all ready. The chat was awesome tonight. You guys are always fantastic. We really, really appreciate you. Please remember, hit that like button on the way out. It really goes a long ways. But on behalf of Chris Kepner and Aaron Quinn, I am Greg Tompsett. You've been listening to Cover One Buffalo, and we are out.